Picture the scene, a simple coffee shop, the kind that goes unnoticed amid the hustle and bustle of a big American city. The polished floor reflects the cool lights. The steady sound of the coffee maker blends with the discreet murmur of customers coming and going without even noticing the details. Among the cups and trays, a figure emerges that no one there seemed to recognize. No one, except a man in an impeccable suit who had just walked through the door. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to being noticed, a watch that cost more than many of his customers' annual salaries, a firm stride, and an expression of someone who'd never had to wait in line. But suddenly, this man stopped. His stare was fixed, incredulous, his breath caught as if he'd been hit by an invisible punch. There, behind the counter, serving coffee in a simple uniform, was the daughter he hadn't seen in years. It's at this point that the story begins to defy our expectations. After all, how could the heiress of one of the richest men in the United States end up in this place? Not as a customer, not as an owner, but as an employee serving coffee and cleaning tables. A glaring contradiction that makes us reflect. Does a life of luxury really guarantee a happy ending? Have you ever stopped to think about how we so often look at someone and think we know their story, when in reality we have no idea what lies behind it? The billionaire, who had everything at his fingertips, was about to discover that his own daughter was hiding a secret more powerful than any fortune. The shock of this reunion isn't just about father and daughter. It speaks to us, to how we judge, to how we shy away from expectations, and even to the invisible price we pay when we choose freedom. Many would say that if they were the children of someone so wealthy, they would never leave. But is that really true? How many of us, when pressured, haven't dreamed of giving up everything to start over? And here, right at the beginning of this narrative, you'll realize that nothing will follow the obvious path. This isn't just a story of reunion, it's a story about pride, choices, and the courage to say no to a seemingly perfect life. Now, before we continue, let me ask you something. If you enjoy stories that touch the soul, please like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming narratives full of emotion and twists, because what happened next will surprise even the most skeptical. The previously silent cafe would become the stage for one of the most unexpected scenes in that, a man's life. And everything would begin to be explained when we go back in time a little to understand how a young woman surrounded by privilege decided to break away from it all. To understand that frozen moment in the coffee shop, we need to go back a few years to a completely different scenario. Imagine mansions with perfectly manicured gardens, luxury cars lined up in the driveway, and frequent trips to destinations many only know from magazine photographs. This was the life of the daughter of one of the country's most talked about billionaires. From a young age, she was raised amid excesses that would make any young woman dream. Elite schools, private tutors, grand parties in ballrooms that resembled modern castles. But therein lies the paradox. What for many would be a golden dream, for her was a decorated prison. Expectations weighed heavily like invisible chains, studying at a certain university, wearing certain brands, only moving in certain social circles, always with an impeccable smile to reinforce the family's perfect image. But behind the makeup, silk and glitter, a feeling of emptiness grew that not even the greatest jewels could fill. How many times have you heard that money buys everything? Well, this story is living proof that it doesn't. Because while journalists wrote about her father's fortune, and people wondered what it was like to live surrounded by such luxury, she dreamed of things most would consider banal: crossing a street without security guards nearby, choosing a cheap burger at a random diner, sitting on a park bench without being followed by curious eyes. And it was amid this contrast that the arguments began, small sparks that turned into emotional fires. He, the billionaire father, couldn't understand how anyone could reject a life of privilege. She, the daughter, refused to accept that her identity was suffocated by the weight of a surname. She compared her life to a movie she'd been forced to act in, without the right to choose the script. In one of these fights, the words spoken were as sharp as blades. Pride, hurt, silence. Anyone who has experienced family conflict knows it doesn't take shouting for a relationship to break down. It just takes an accumulation of misunderstanding. And that's exactly what happened. The breakup came unexpectedly. An ordinary night, a slammed door, and suddenly her room was empty. No note, no explanation. What seemed like just another argument turned into the final straw in a story of shared life. Now think about it. When someone ordinary disappears, the family goes to the police, makes appeals on television, puts up posters. When a billionaire's daughter disappears, the impact is multiplied. There were journalists circling, speculation, absurd rumors. Some said it was just rebellion, others said kidnapping. But the truth is, she had chosen silence as a way to cry out for freedom, and it's precisely here that curiosity peaks. Because if until that moment her life seemed to follow a predictable script, now the story took an unexpected turn. Her destiny began to be written away from the spotlight, in places where no one would ever imagine seeing her. And while her father mobilized his resources, hired investigators, and moved heaven and earth to find his missing daughter, she was already beginning a silent journey, far from everything money could buy. The empty room still seemed to hold the echo of the last words exchanged between father and daughter. At first, the billionaire believed it was just a passing act of rebellion, perhaps a weekend at a friend's house, an attempt to attract attention. After all, who would abandon a life of comfort to venture into the unknown? But the days turned into weeks, and the silence remained absolute. No phone calls, no messages, no clues. It was at this point that paternal instincts merged with financial power. He called in renowned investigators, paid astronomical sums for information, tracked flights, monitored borders, and contacted agencies specializing in disappearances, all to no avail. The more he searched, the more the void grew. The fortune, which had always opened doors, this time seemed useless. And here comes a disturbing reflection. How many ordinary parents face the same despair, but without a tenth of the resources he had? How many families put up posters, rely on the goodwill of the media, pray in the hope of a phone call? The billionaire, with all his money, was experiencing the same pain as any ordinary person. Perhaps even greater, because he couldn't accept the idea of not being in control. Rumors began to surface. Some newspapers suggested the daughter had been kidnapped. Others claimed she'd been involved in complicated relationships. There were even conspiracy theories, worthy of movies, that spoke of her fleeing to another country or attempting to forge a new identity. The truth, however, was much simpler, and precisely for that reason, much harder to accept. While detectives followed false leads, she had chosen something no one imagined: to live without a trace. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no social media. A young woman who grew up surrounded by cameras and public records learned to disappear precisely because she knew where she shouldn't be. It was as if she had turned the tables. While her father tried to find her in the world of appearances, she hid in the world of simplicity. This contrast raises an inevitable question. Was she simply seeking freedom by running away, or was she also trying to teach her father a lesson? Some say that certain absences speak louder than any speech, and her absence screamed in silence, showing that not all wealth can buy what truly matters: presence, affection, understanding. Time passed, and the anguish only grew. The man, who was accustomed to seeing his businesses prosper, quickly suddenly found himself powerless in the face of what mattered most to him. And, as if fate had a taste for irony, His daughter was closer than he could have ever imagined, rebuilding his life, almost invisibly, and it's at this point that the story becomes even more surprising. Because while the media fueled speculation and fortunes were wasted on aimless pursuits, she had already found a space to begin again. An unlikely, modest space, but one that would become the stage for the most unexpected reunion of all. As the search grew increasingly frustrating, in a simple neighborhood almost forgotten by tourists, a corner coffee shop welcomed hurried workers and sleepy students daily. The atmosphere was welcoming in its simplicity. Exposed brick walls, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the air, an old-fashioned bell on the door announcing each customer's arrival. And it was there, behind the counter, that she reappeared, not to the world, but to herself. She wore a modest uniform, with the coffee shop's name embroidered on the chest. Her hair, once carefully groomed by luxury professionals, was now tied up in a practical way, revealing a natural beauty that needed no artifice. Her gestures were serene, almost therapeutic, making a cappuccino, smiling at a customer, clearing a table. Small details that for many would go unnoticed, but for her represented true freedom. It may seem strange to think that someone who grew up surrounded by luxuries would find peace in simple tasks. But isn't happiness really found in the things money can't buy? While her father flew over cities in private jets searching for clues, she found meaning in the clink of spoons and the steam rising from the coffee machine. This contrast raises a powerful reflection. How often do we confuse status with purpose? How many people strive for titles, diplomas, and fortunes, only to discover, too late, that the emptiness remains within? The billionaire's daughter, on the other hand, seemed to have understood early on that life needed a different flavor. And it wasn't the metallic taste of money. The customers who frequented the coffee shop had no idea who she was. To them, she was just another friendly, attentive young woman who remembered orders by heart and offered kind words on difficult days. This invisibility, once unthinkable, was now her greatest shield, and curiously, also her greatest achievement. It's impossible not to think of metaphors when we look at this scene. The whirring coffee machine could very well symbolize her heart finding a new rhythm. The cups lined up on the counter remind us that life can be reorganized with simplicity. And the diner, small and almost hidden, represents a refuge where surname didn't matter, only presence. But fate, which loves to write unlikely scenarios, was already preparing an encounter that would change everything. Because that coffee shop, which seemed like just an ordinary spot on the city map, would soon become the scene of a revelation. A shock capable of making headlines, but which, before that, would break hearts and shake deep-seated convictions. And the burning question is, what happens when two such opposite worlds, that of achieved simplicity and that of lost wealth, collide? At the same counter, the answer lies just ahead, and it's far more surprising than you might imagine. The morning at the coffee shop seemed ordinary. Business was moderate. Customers spread out among the tables, some with laptops open, others just looking for a quick coffee before getting on with their day. The young woman behind the counter worked silently, with the calm that only those who have found some kind of peace can convey. Nothing seemed out of place until the door opened and the bell rang, announcing the arrival of a new customer. He entered as he did any room, commanding attention. His tailored suit, his gleaming watch, the haughty gaze of someone accustomed to leading million-dollar meetings and being waited on, never serving. But as he took 2 steps into the establishment, something changed. His eyes fixed on a figure behind the counter, and the world around him seemed to lose its sound. The billionaire froze. It wasn't possible. Was it a trick of the mind? A mirage? Caused by longing? But no, there she was, alive, real in the flesh, holding a pot of coffee as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The daughter he hadn't seen since that night of their breakup was there, before him, with a polite smile on her face, serving strangers. His heart raced in a way no business deal, no bold negotiation had ever provoked. He, who had so often faced hostile executive suites, impatient investors, and aggressive reporters, trembled in front of his own daughter. His hands sweated, his body wavered. The powerful businessman seemed, for the first time, an ordinary man. And here comes a significant break in expectations. Many imagined that in a reunion like this, there would be immediate tears, hugs, and heartfelt apologies. But the reality was different. Silence fell. She looked him in the eye, recognized him immediately, but her expression wasn't one of surprise. It was as if she already knew that sooner or later this moment would arrive. The contrast between their two worlds became almost palpable. He, dressed in luxury, carrying the weight of wealth and longing. She, in a simple uniform, her hands lightly stained with coffee, exuding a serenity no mansion could offer. What could have been a scene of instant reconciliation turned into a kind of silent duel, and it's at this point that the suspense intensifies. Because more than the reunion itself, what really mattered was what she would say. After years of silence, what would her first sentence be? An accusation, a cry of rage, a plea for help, or something even more unexpected? Before revealing that answer, let me extend an invitation. If you've been involved in this story thus far, subscribe to the channel right now. That way, you won't miss the ending, which will surprise you, and you'll also help more people discover moving narratives like this one. Also, please like this video, because it's the fuel that keeps this work alive. Returning to the reunion. He approached slowly, as if afraid of breaking fragile glass. Each step seemed to weigh a ton. The sound of the coffee shop faded for him, as if the two of them were the only ones in the room. When he finally reached the counter, the words stuck in his throat. The billionaire, who had so often spoken before crowds, couldn't even string a sentence together, and then came the turning point. She opened her mouth first. In a calm, steady, unshaken voice, she said something that not only dismantled her father, but also redefined the entire story. It wasn't an insult, it wasn't a plea. It was something so unexpected that, for a moment, the silence became even heavier. Their reunion wasn't just a clash of glances, but a clash of values, and what she said in that moment is what you'll discover in the next chapter, when the dialogue that changed everything reveals the true essence of their encounter. The silence in the coffee shop was almost deafening to the two of them. Every detail seemed to gain exaggerated clarity. The sound of steam escaping from the coffee machine, the sound of a spoon hitting a cup, the soft background music playing. But none of that mattered. The billionaire and his daughter were face to face, and time seemed suspended. Tears welling in his eyes, he searched for words. So many things to say, so many apologies, so many justifications he'd mentally rehearsed during sleepless nights. But in front of her, nothing came. The man who signed billion-dollar contracts in minutes was now incapable of even uttering a hello. It was then that she, with the calm of someone who had finally found solid ground, broke the silence. Looking into her father's eyes, she said, "I didn't run away from you. I ran away from the life you chose for me." There was no rancor in his voice, no hatred. His tone was firm but calm, like someone finally understanding their own journey. The impact was immediate. The billionaire felt each word like a punch to the chest. He expected disapproval, perhaps even cruel accusations. But what he received was even harder to bear, the simple, stark truth that dismantled any defense. She continued, "I spent years being molded into someone I never wanted to be. Clothes, parties, trips. It all seemed amazing, but none of it belonged to me. It was like I was living a role written by you, not me. When I decided to leave, it wasn't to hurt you. It was to find myself." Shock washed over him. For the first time, he realized that all the effort, all the opportunities he'd offered, might have been nothing more than chains disguised as gifts. What he'd thought was love, she'd felt as imprisonment. And this is a reflection that resonates with us all. How often, without realizing it, do we suffocate the people we love, trying to give them what we believe is the best? The billionaire tried to respond, but his words stumbled. He said he loved her, that he never wanted her to feel this way, that everything was for her own good. But she interrupted him with a gentle gesture of her hand and added, "I don't need your fortune, Father. I just need you to understand that I am capable of choosing my own path." It was at that moment that his tears fell. Not tears of anger, nor of frustration. They were tears of someone who finally realized he couldn't control everything. Not with power, not with money, not with misinterpreted love. This dialogue is the heart of this story. It wasn't just a physical reunion, but a collision of worlds. Hers, now simple yet full of meaning. His, grand yet empty without his daughter's presence. The climax wasn't a cinematic embrace or an instant reconciliation. It was the clash of truths, the exchange of phrases that exposed wounds and, at the same time, opened space for healing. And it's precisely this shattering of expectations that makes the scene unforgettable. Because while many expected a cliched ending, what was revealed was something much more human. The pain of misunderstanding, the weight of choices, the courage to break invisible chains. She didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did she offer it. What she delivered was her truth, and sometimes that's far more powerful than any rehearsed gesture. Now, if you're following this story, tell me, how many times have you felt trapped by something you didn't choose? How many times have you dreamed of simply dropping everything and starting over from scratch? That's the big question here. It's not just about a billionaire's daughter, it's about all of us who at some point feel the weight of expectations beyond our control. And if this scene touched you in any way, take advantage and subscribe to the channel right now. This way, you'll stay up to date with all our upcoming stories, full of emotion, reflection, and unexpected twists. Also, leave a like, because it really helps keep this mission of telling stories that go beyond the obvious alive. But the story doesn't end there, because after this devastating exchange, one question remained. What would happen next? Would the billionaire be able to get close to her again? Or would this reunion be just an isolated chapter, with no chance of continuation? The answers begin to appear in the next chapter, when the consequences of this encounter reveal that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. After the shock of the reunion and the words that echoed like a revelation, came the heavy silence of choices. The billionaire left the coffee shop with a broken heart, but also with a new perspective on his own life. For the first time, he couldn't buy a solution. There was no lawyer, consultant, or executive capable of mediating that conflict. It was he in front of his daughter and nothing else. In the days that followed, the man most accustomed to giving orders found himself in a rare position, having to wait. He tried to return to the coffee shop, but realized that simply invading her space with his presence wasn't enough. He needed to respect her time, to understand that in this new plot, he wasn't the one writing the script. And this role reversal speaks volumes. How many parents don't believe they know what's best for their children, failing to realize that every imposed choice is a wall built between hearts? How many believe that offering comfort is synonymous with offering happiness? He, with all his fortune, finally understood that the greatest legacy he could leave wasn't in safes, but in gestures of respect and listening. The daughter, for her part, didn't close the doors. There was no hatred in her heart, only the need to preserve the space she had earned. She continued working at the coffee shop, living simply, cultivating a routine that made her feel like she owned herself. But little by little, she allowed her father to get closer, not as a billionaire, not as an authority, but as a man willing to learn. Their reunion didn't bring instant reconciliation. It brought something more real, the beginning of a slow process, full of ups and downs. Discreet lunches in simple places, shy conversations about childhood memories, silences that no longer needed to be filled with luxury. He learned to enter her world without trying to transform it. And she, little by little, allowed the past to be revisited without fear of losing the freedom she had gained. This outcome, far from a movie ending, is perhaps even more moving, because it reminds us that relationships aren't resolved by magical hugs, but by daily choices of humility and patience. The daughter didn't return to the mansions, and the father didn't abandon the business, but both learned to coexist in a space of mutual respect, understanding that love isn't imposition, but acceptance. Now think with me. How many times in your life have you tried to please someone by controlling their path? How many times have you forgotten that true love is about giving wings, not chains? This story forces us to reflect on how we treat those who matter most, because, in the end, it's not the size of the bank account that matters, but the depth of the relationships we build. The billionaire, who previously measured his life in numbers, began to measure his days by the small achievements with his daughter, a shared coffee, an unexpected message, a sincere hug after a long time. And he discovered that true fortune lay not in skyscrapers or yachts, but in the simple fact of being accepted as a father again. And if you were in her shoes, what would you do? Would you open the door to reconciliation, or would you keep your distance to protect your own freedom? That's the question, and this is where I want to hear your opinion. If this story touched you, please like it now. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people with messages that touch deeply. Also, subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories, always full of twists, reflections, and moments that make us rethink life. And finally, I want to ask you something special. Comment below what you would have said in her position at that counter. Your answer may inspire others who also experience the dilemma between freedom and expectation, because in the end, this isn't just the story of a daughter and a billionaire father. It's a story about all of us, about the courage to choose, the pain of letting go, and the beauty of rediscovering what truly matters.